Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we take a look at the 10 best horror movies of the last 10 years. And with that, let's get to the list.
I'm sick, Sam. I need help.
The Babadook is a 2014 Australian psychological horror movie. Written and directed by Jennifer Kent in her directorial debut, it stars Essie Davis and Noah Wiseman. It's about a single mother who is plagued by the violent death of her husband and battles with her son's fear of monsters lurking in the house after reading an eerie children's book.
It's just a book. It can't hurt you.
So it's really baffled me the last few years how I've heard this movie get some hate, and a movie that's coming up on the list as well, because I remember when this came out and how blown away the majority of people were and how everybody raved about it. And it was like the must go see movie. But then as time's gone by, I just hear more and more people say it's overrated and things like that. I don't know if that's the younger generation that just wasn't alive at the time and so they only compare it to what they see now. Maybe that's the case. It's hard to say, but I do know that this movie had a huge impact on the film industry in general, not just horror, but in movies in general, because it showed that a little indie movie on a tiny micro budget could make stars and make an impact at theaters, especially for a foreign horror. That was just not something we saw very often, but it was also the way the story was told. There was a very artsy kind of slow burn vibe to it that resonated with audiences and was different than what we were seeing, especially in horror, but in film in general at the time. Another complaint I've heard quite a few people mention is how annoying the kid is. Well, yeah, that's the point. Sometimes I scratch my head and try to get my head around why people don't see the obvious in movies. Like, people will complain about elements that it's like, well, yeah, that's the point. It's like in Longlegs. I've heard people complaining about Micah Monroe's performance and how she kind of acts like a drone and how she doesn't have a lot of personality and just looks like she's in a dream state. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the point of the movie. That's exactly what she's supposed to be like, because that's part of the story. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just some people miss the obvious. I don't know. I'm not trying to hate on anyone, but it drives me crazy because I see tons of comments about things like this, and it's like, guys, come on. That's part of the point of the movie. Like, of course this kid's annoying because the mom is supposed to be going nuts. So his acting and his personality and all that has to be turned up to level 12, because the reality is he's probably not anywhere near as annoying as he is to her in this moment. And that's the point. Like, this is her perspective on the world. All of this is her perspective on things. And so you're really seeing it through her eyes in this film. But I think this is a well-written, well-shot, well-directed movie that had a huge impact on horror especially, and absolutely is my pick for 2014. But I also want to mention my runners-up for 2014 because there are two other movies that I love, and that's Oculus and As Above, So Below. Just fantastic movies in their own right. It Follows is a 2015 horror movie, written and directed by David Robert Mitchell. It stars Micah Monroe, Jake Weary, and Keir Gilchrist. A young woman is followed by an unknown supernatural force after a sexual encounter.
This thing, it's gonna follow you. Somebody gave it to me, and I passed it to you.
Okay, so this is the other one that I have heard a lot of hate from people over as well. I don't get it because, once again, when this movie came out, it was a game changer. I mean, it completely helped, along with the Babadook, change the industry, because that's when we started seeing these A24 artsy kind of horror movies, the slow burns. Those are kind of movies that I love, and they're not for everyone. I get that element, but I just don't remember these movies getting hate back when they were released, because they were both just these kind of little engines that could, where they packed a big punch with tiny micro budgets and cast that no one had heard of. And thank the horror gods, because this is the movie that introduced us to Maika Monroe, and she's become a staple of the industry in the last few years. She just continues to blow me away in everything I see her in. But as much as I've heard quite a bit of hate for this movie over the last few years, I also hear this huge buzz of excitement with people knowing that there's a sequel finally coming out this next year. So I guess maybe it's just like all things in the world right now. People are just split and divided on everything, including movies. But I personally am very excited to see this year what they could do with a sequel. It's one that I feel like is well overdue, because it's a world that is set up so well in this film, and it lives in that world of dread, where it's not a cheap jump scare, but this overwhelming feeling that you just can't get away from. But once again, this is an extremely well done movie, especially considering what they were working with, and absolutely my pick for 2015. But I also want to mention a couple runners up from that year as well. And that would be What We Do in the Shadows, Bone Tomahawk, and The Gift. Those are all three incredible movies, and I had a really hard time picking between these on what would be the representative for this year, and it really came down to the one that had the biggest impact. And few movies have had the impact of It Follows from the last 10 years, so that is definitely my pick for 2015.
Let's leave the fort.
The Witch is a 2016 folk horror movie, written and directed by Robert Eggers in his feature directorial debut. It stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Ralph Ineson, and Kate Dickie. A family in 1630s New England is torn apart by the forces of witchcraft, black magic, and possession.
Boo! There you are. Boo!
This is a magnificent movie. It feels so authentic to the times. It's almost like you're watching something from the History Channel, because that's how accurate it is. But its production and the acting, directing, writing, everything else about it takes it to a whole different level. But it just has that kind of accuracy and nuance to it. Because if you've researched this period in history really at all, you'll see the attention to detail. And it's amazing, because this was Robert Eggers' first real feature-length film, and yet it's just brilliant. It's immaculate in its detail, its feeling of dread and anxiety, which is really what he is so good at as a filmmaker. He doesn't necessarily live in that scary horror movie kind of world. It's more in the dread, the anxiety, this foreboding, overwhelming feeling that just engulfs you throughout the movie. And this is very much a slow burn. So I get, if you're not a fan of slow burns, this is not going to be your pick at all for this year. But as someone who can really appreciate all different types of horror movies for the different reasons, this to me was my pick, because even just the fact that this is Robert Eggers' first movie, that by itself carries a lot of weight because of what he has done since this movie, especially with his most recent release of Nosferatu. He just makes amazing films, especially visually. But beyond that, this movie is so effective at what it's trying to do. And that's a lot of how I look at movies, is what was the filmmaker, what was the artist behind this, the artist's hand, so to speak, behind this movie? What were they intending to accomplish? And I think Robert Eggers is as good as anybody at accomplishing that goal. But once again, this year was really difficult, because there was one movie in particular that I was so close to putting, and that's A Train to Busan. That movie is incredible in its own right. I also want to mention The Autopsy of Jane Doe and Don't Breathe. All three of those movies are incredible, and it's hard to pick between them. But I went with The Witch because of really the impact it's had on horror. We've seen Ralph Ineson do a bunch of different horror projects, and of course, Anya Taylor-Joy. And then, like I said, Robert Eggers has gone on to do a number of films in the genre. So just overall, I just slightly put it above those three for my pick for 2016. Get Out is a 2017 psychological horror movie, co-produced, written, and directed by Jordan Peele. It stars Daniel Kaluuya, Allison Williams, and Catherine Keener. A young black man visits his white girlfriend's parents for the weekend, where his simmering uneasiness about the reception of him eventually reaches a boiling point.
Sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink.
Mine is a terrible thing to waste.
Talk about impact. This movie hit hard. It was so surprising for me as well as tons of other people, because we all love Jordan Peele in his comedic roles, the different things he's done in the comedy space, but no one saw him coming as being an amazing horror director. And not everybody loves him. There's definitely hate out there for various reasons, which I'm not going to get into. But at least in my opinion, he is definitely one of the best filmmakers working today. And I love the fact that he's done a lot of things in the horror space. Yes, Nope was a little bit sci-fi horror, but still, he's done things in that thriller horror world, and I think he's doing a damn good job. Now, I'm not going to say everything he's done has been as good as Get Out, but we're talking about Get Out right now, and it's an incredible movie. I mean, it was nominated for an Oscar. That right there is huge in the horror space. We don't see that. Hopefully this year we'll see The Substance maybe get some nominations, or Nosferatu, but usually horror is snubbed big time by the Oscars, so to see this movie getting a nomination was incredible. But it's just so well written, well directed, it looks fantastic, the cast is incredible in this, and it has a really powerful message, but it's still scary, it's still entertaining. And so often we see movies that have like an important message to say, kind of lose sight that they're also there to entertain you, that they're also there to be a horror movie, to be a film, because otherwise it just gets stale. It's kind of like that bad teacher in a classroom. If you're not keeping things entertaining, it's easy to fall asleep, regardless of how important what you're trying to say is. But I think Get Out of the last 10 years is probably the one that'll go down in history as important as anything we've seen. It's like, the way I look at it is, if we're lucky, every year we get that one movie that just kind of separates itself for various reasons a little bit above the rest. Not necessarily maybe your favorite, not necessarily maybe the most fun to watch, not all of that, but if you take everything into consideration, talk about the way it looks, the acting, the way it's written, the way it made you feel, what it was intending to do, and what it actually accomplished. And if you take all those things together, there's usually one, and if we're lucky, sometimes maybe two movies each year that kind of have that slot. It's what I call my highly recommended movies. But that year we also had some other amazing movies I want to mention: Raw, Split, and Black Coat's Daughter. I love Black Coat's Daughter. But for me, for 2017, there is no doubt about it, it was Get Out.
What's happening?
I just don't want to put any more stress on my family.
Hereditary is a 2018 supernatural psychological horror movie, written and directed by Ari Aster in his feature directorial debut. It stars Toni Collette, Alex Wolff, and Millie Shapiro. The film follows a grieving family, haunted by a mysterious presence after the death of their secretive grandmother.
Who's gonna take care of me?
You don't think I'm gonna take care of you?
But when you die,
I mean, holy shit. Is there any way I could have picked any other movie for that year? Hereditary just blew audiences away, including myself. There are scenes in this that left us with our jaw on the floor. It's just so powerful and yet well written, well shot, well directed. The cast is incredible. I mean, everything about this movie is brilliant. I mean, even people that are not exactly fans of it, if they look at it objectively, should be able to still at least admit how well made and what a just well done movie in every way it is. Because some of these years were very difficult for me to pick, but this year, I thought was just absolutely a no-brainer. Because that's not to say there wasn't other good movies that year, because there really was. Because we also had Annihilation that year, The Ritual, as well as A Quiet Place and Upgrade. I mean, all those are phenomenal movies, but as stacked of a year as it was, and as good as all those movies are, to me, Hereditary stands head and shoulders above. Because in my opinion, Hereditary is one of the greatest horror movies ever made, and without a doubt, my pick for 2018.
was most excited for you to come.
Midsommar is a 2019 folk horror movie. Written and directed by Ari Aster, it stars Florence Pugh, Jack Reiner, and Will Poulter. A couple travels to Northern Europe to visit a fabled Swedish summer festival, and what begins as an idyllic retreat devolves into an increasingly violent and bizarre competition at the hands of a pagan cult.
Unbelievable.
Welcome and happy midsummer. Skål!
There might have never been a better back-to-back year release for a horror filmmaker. I mean, seriously, to go from Hereditary and then the very next year to have Midsommar come out, and I'm not saying that Midsommar is as good as Hereditary or on that same level. I don't think it is, but I do think it's an extremely well done movie, a very powerful movie that impacted me and a lot of other people on a very deep level. And I'm not saying it's the most fun movie that year or the most scary movie that year, but to me, the genre is about so much more than that. I think a lot of people just look at it on a superficial level and it's like, oh, horror, that means scary. It's like, no, there's a lot more to horror than that. And if you're a big time diehard fan of the genre like I am, you'll understand that there is so many other emotions and feelings and topics and all these other things besides just scary in the horror genre. And I think this movie was like a cornucopia of all those different things. It's full of dread. There is so much anxiety. It's dark and bleak and gory at times, very graphic and bothersome. I mean, it really has so much in it. Beyond that, it is incredibly well shot, well written. The cast is incredible in it, especially Florence Pugh. Once again, just like with Hereditary, it's like a master class on how to make an indie film. But there's also 3 other movies that I want to mention from that year that are also incredible, and that is Ready or Not, which is probably one of the most fun movie we've seen in the last 10 years. We also had The Lighthouse, which, you know, I mean, that is an incredible movie in its own right for various different reasons. And it was tough to not go with that, but I felt like Midsommar is a little bit more in the genre, whereas The Lighthouse is a little more fringe. Like, it's a little more artsy drama period piece, not as much horror. But that year we also had probably the most underrated horror movie of the last 10 years, and that's Dr. Sleep. It's still a travesty to me how little that movie is talked about, because it's another incredible film. But for me, there was no doubt about it. For 2019, I had to go with Midsommar.
Sometimes that small thought is all it takes to lose control.
Possessor is a 2020 sci-fi psychological horror movie. Written and directed by Brandon Cronenberg, it stars Andrea Riseborough, Christopher Abbott, and Roosevelt Sutherland. The story is about an assassin who performs her assignments through possessing the bodies of other individuals, but finds herself fighting to control the body of her current host.
Ready?
So I think it's a real shame that this movie hasn't gotten more buzz, that it's not talked about like in the same level as a lot of these other movies I've mentioned, because I think it's incredibly powerful. It's deep. It's emotional, it's bizarre, it's upsetting and uncomfortable, it's dark and gritty, it's well written, well directed, and of course, with a name like Cronenberg involved, it's got body horror in it. But it's this really awesome futuristic kind of sci-fi that feels like it's just barely out of reach, like our technology is almost there, and so it gives this movie this real feel to it as well. Because yes, we're dealing with future tech, you know, we got this device that can allow someone to go in and possess the body of another person and other elements of future tech, but they're not outlandish feeling. They don't feel so far out of reach like a lot of sci-fi movies. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about what Brandon Cronenberg that separates him from his father. Because David Cronenberg is much more into the really bizarre body horror, the stuff that is very outlandish, that very much takes you into this surreal world. Whereas Brandon is a little bit more toned back, but some of the things that he does with body horror feel even more upsetting because they feel more like something that could actually happen. But this movie caught me off guard so much because, for one, when I saw it, I didn't know that Brandon Cronenberg was the son of David Cronenberg. I didn't even know really his name. I just saw this movie as people were talking about, hey, there's this really cool movie you should check out. And it just floored me, absolutely blew me away. Unfortunately, I didn't see it until early 2021, so it wasn't on my 2020 list at the end of 2020, but it really should have been, because it is definitely the best of that year, in my opinion. It also gets very gory and extremely graphic, sexually as well as violent-wise. I mean, this does not hold back in any way. So I think if you're someone that's been sleeping on this movie and haven't seen it yet, you're in for a treat, and you need to do yourself a favor and check it out. But there's also 3 other movies that I have to mention from that year that are incredible as well. And one of those is The Empty Man, which is a brilliant movie. Another one that not enough people have seen, and it still doesn't get the love it deserves. Another one that doesn't get the love it deserves is His House. And then we also had The Invisible Man that year, which is a movie that I felt like was swept under the rug just a little bit because it was just starting out on a theatrical release when the pandemic hit. So it was pulled out of theaters, and it just never really got the play that I think it would have if it had been a normal year, which is another reason why The Empty Man didn't do well, because it came out into theaters for like 2 weeks in this like October time-ish area where only some theaters were open, and it was for a very, very short time, and they closed right back up. And so that movie lived in obscurity as well. And so as brilliant as all 3 of those are, I just barely gave the edge to Possessor because I feel like it's the most creative and imaginative of those movies. And so that's why it's my pick for 2020.
Safe from what?
The Night House is a 2021 psychological horror movie. Directed by David Bruckner, it stars Rebecca Hall, Sarah Goldberg, and Evan Jonike. A widow begins to uncover her recently deceased husband's disturbing secrets.
You said you were safe? Safe from what?
This is one of the most powerful movies, one of the most brilliantly acted, written, directed, the way it's shot, the cinematography, the lighting, it is just so good. And it drives me crazy that it's never gotten the attention it deserved. And I get it. It's a very dark, a very bleak, a very somber kind of horror movie, and that just isn't for everybody. I get it. You know, fun movies, action-packed movies are the ones that the majority of people are going to be more into. But there's been few movies, especially in the last 10 years, that have impacted me on such a deep level like this movie did. For one, Rebecca Hall's performance is Oscar-worthy. It's one of the biggest crimes that the Oscars didn't nominate her for this performance, as well as Toni Collette for Hereditary. And hopefully this year, Demi Moore will get some recognition from the Oscars for The Substance, but it just shows that over and over and over again, the Oscars just does not give respect to the genre, and it's a real crime. But this performance here, I'll stand on whatever you got. Well, a box, you know, the hood of your car, like whatever you got. I will stand and yell to whoever will listen that her performance here deserves an Oscar. It is incredible. It is so powerful, so disturbing, and just emotional. And there's something in this, in the way that it's shot, that David Bruckner pulls off that I've really never seen done before. The way darkness, the way evil, so to speak, without spoiling this movie for you, the way it's portrayed in this, the way you see it, so to speak, is the most unique and yet disturbing and powerful way of almost anything I've ever seen. It wasn't really until Nosferatu from this year that I saw something that felt as dark and evil and oppressive as this movie, and that's another story and another movie I'll talk about. If you watch my best of the year video, I do talk about Nosferatu in it. But this movie, it's so good. But I do understand It's not everybody's cup of tea, but at least for me, it's definitely my favorite for that year. But I also want to mention another French film made by the same filmmaker that did Raw. It's called Titane, and it's another brilliant, bizarre, great movie. That year we also had Saint Maud, Last Night in Soho, Malignant, and The Black Phone. Just an incredible year. But in my humble opinion, the movie that deserved my pick the most for 2021 was The Night House.
No one's forcing you to stay, but I really hope you do, because today is gonna be a great day.
Speak No Evil is a 2022 psychological horror movie. Directed by Christian Tafdrop, it stars Fedja Van Hewitt, Morten Burien, and Sidsel Siem Koch. A Danish family visits a Dutch family they met on holiday, and what was supposed to be an idyllic weekend slowly unravels as the Danes try to stay polite in the face of unpleasantness.
You made it! Sorry for the mess. It's gonna get much worse. Come on.
I mean, if you're talking about dark and gritty and disturbing and impactful films, and you don't mention Speak No Evil from the last 10 years, you're just not watching enough horror, in my opinion anyway, because I think this movie is as dark and bleak and disturbing and uncomfortable as anything I've seen definitely in the last 10 years. It's well acted, well directed. Just everything about this film is well put together. And I know, like a lot of you guys, I was not happy to hear they were making a remake, that Blumhouse was making a remake this year. Because for one, like, why are you gonna make a remake basically a year after the release of this film? On top of that, half this movie is spoken in English, so it's not even like you gotta read a lot of subtitles, whereas sometimes you'll see remakes made because of the subtitle element, the foreign element, but that wasn't even the case. Either way though, I do think the Blumhouse Speak No Evil was still pretty good. And I know there's a lot of people that actually liked the 2024 Blumhouse Speak No Evil more, at least the ending more. And I get that, but at least to me, this movie was way more powerful. It hit me so much harder. It is something that just got under my skin and has stuck with me for years now. Like, whenever I think about this movie, and especially the ending of it, I just get chills. It's that uncomfortable, that brutal and bleak. And that to me was what the intention of this movie was. And I think it executed that as well as you possibly can. But 2022 was stacked because we also had X and Pearl and Smile and Barbarian. I mean, just an incredible year it was. But my pick for 2022 is Speak No Evil because I think it was definitely the most impactful film that year.
Se terminan rápido.
When Evil Lurks is a 2023 Argentine horror movie. Written and directed by Demian Rugna, it stars Ezequiel Rodriguez, Louis Zambrowski, and Emilio Vadovic. In a remote village, two brothers find a demon-infected man about to give birth to evil itself. So they try to get rid of the man, but merely succeed in helping him to deliver the inferno. If you guys have been watching this channel for the last year or so, you have absolutely heard me talk about this movie because it's one of my favorite movies, period, especially from the last 10 years. It has everything I want in a horror movie. It is gritty, it's dirty, it's gross. There's amazing body horror in it. The special effects are practically done and they look incredible. It is seriously one of the most brutal, vicious, and gory, as well as gross and disturbing. It's bleak at times, it's dark, it's scary, it's got every element. It's so dark and nasty. It has just everything I want in a horror movie. It's so well written. There's a whole universe that's built out here, and it doesn't hold your hand, but it gives you enough to kind of get an idea of this world we're in and the rules and what's going on in this universe. And it's so unique and imaginative and creative. There's so many things about this movie that just feel fresh and original. And in the genre of horror, where there are so many ideas out there, so many movies that have been made, to come up with something so unique, that's refreshing and amazing. But there was also a couple other really brilliant movies. We had Talk to Me that year, as well as Godzilla -1, but Godzilla -1 was more of my movie of the year, but it wasn't really horror. Otherwise, it might have been a lot closer with When Evil Lurks, because it's an incredible movie in its own right, but definitely not horror. But we also had Thanksgiving, as well as Evil Dead Rise, and then of course Saw 10. But it was an incredible year for horror, but When Evil Lurks was definitely my pick for 2023. But if you want to hear what my picks are for 2024 and what my number one for the year is, definitely go check out my best of the year video I just dropped a few days ago. The link's right here. I also want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys mean so much to me. And if you would like to help support this channel over on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. Or you can become a channel member by clicking on that join button down there. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember, guys, horror can be fun. And if you enjoyed this, like I said, click right here to watch me talk about the 10 best horror movies of 2024. And I'll see you guys next time.